It was just after 3 p.m. Hundreds of middle school students eagerly awaited hearing the last bell ring out that would free them for the afternoon. In the auditorium, 50 mothers watched a sweet performance from their oblivious children. In the basement-level shop class, teacher Lemmy Butler reached for an electric switch to turn on a saw. One small, innocent decision would cause the worst school disaster in America's history. Welcome to the Crafty Cryptid, a channel dedicated to the dark, the strange, and the mysterious. If you enjoy this type of content, subscribe and ding the notification bell. I post multiple times a week. Today, let's dive into the disaster of the New London school explosion. The greatest loss of life in an American school has absolutely nothing to do with mass shooters, and absolutely everything to do with lax safety procedures. The New London School in Texas was meant to be an educational utopia for the children of one of America's wealthiest school districts. The school was built on sloping ground, and a large airspace was enclosed beneath the structure. The school board had overridden the original architect's plans for a boiler and steam distribution system, instead opting to install 72 gas heaters throughout the building. Early in 1937, the school board canceled their natural gas contract and had plumbers install a tap into Parade Gasoline Company's residue gas line to save money. This practice, while not explicitly authorized by local oil companies, was widespread in the area. The natural gas extracted with the oil was considered a waste product and was flared off. As there was no value to the natural gas, the oil companies turned a blind eye. Untreated natural gas is both odorless and colorless, so leaks are difficult to detect and may go unnoticed. Gas had been leaking from the residue line tap and built up inside the enclosed crawl space that ran the entire 253-foot or 77-meter length of the building's facade. Students had been complaining of headaches for some time, but little attention had been paid to the issue. Approximately 500 students and 40 teachers were in the main building at the time, although some numbers claim there were roughly 694 students in the main building and at the campus. At 3:17 p.m., Lemmy Butler, a teacher in the school's shop class, turned on an electric saw. It is believed that the saw's switch caused a spark that ignited the gas-air mixture brewing beneath the school. The resulting explosion didn't just level the school, it blew shockwaves through the entire community, so loud that workers 4 miles away heard it and came running. Of the 700 pupils and staff, somewhere in the region of 300 were killed. Reports from witnesses state that the walls of the school bulged, the roof lifted from the building and then crashed back down, and the main wing of the structure collapsed. Survivors in the building claimed that lockers embedded in the wall were thrown at them by the blast. Others were picked up by the force of the explosion, and the plaster and mortar formed a white haze. The force of the explosion was so great that a 2-ton concrete block was thrown clear off the building and crushed a 1936 Chevrolet parked 200 feet away. Those who evacuated the building after the explosion were in a state of shock, with some recounting that they did not know what to do next, and that it seemed the world was deadly silent until the sound came back all at once. The most immediate response was from parents at a PTA meeting in the building next to the school. Within minutes, area residents started to arrive and began digging through the rubble, many with their bare hands. Many survivors also joined in the immediate aftermath in recovery of other survivors and victims. Roughnecks from the oil fields were released from their jobs and brought with them cutting torches and heavy equipment needed to clear the concrete and steel. School bus driver Lonnie Barber was transporting elementary students to their homes and was in sight of the school as it exploded. Barber continued his 2-hour route, returning children to their parents, before rushing back to the school to look for his 4 children. His son Arden died, but the others were not seriously injured. Other school buses were employed to drive ambulatory survivors back to their homes. Aid poured in from outside the area. Governor of Texas James V. Allred dispatched Texas Rangers, Highway Patrol, and the Texas National Guard. 30 doctors, 100 nurses, and 25 embalmers arrived from Dallas. Airmen from Barksdale Field, deputy sheriffs, and even Boy Scouts took part in the rescue and recovery. In their desperation to get victims and survivors out of the rubble, many rescuers did not immediately check if the body they came across was alive or dead. Rescuers worked through the night and rain, and 17 hours later the entire site had been cleared. Many who worked in the rescue were so overcome with shock, as one survivor recounted. "Daddy worked so long, he almost had a nervous breakdown. As long as he was working, he was fine, but as soon as he came home and sat down, he'd start shaking." Buildings in the neighboring communities were converted into makeshift first aid tents and morgues to house the enormous number of bodies, and everything from family cars to delivery trucks served as hearses and ambulances. A new hospital, Mother Frances Hospital in Tyler, was scheduled to open the next day, but the dedication was canceled and the hospital opened immediately. Reporters who arrived in the city found themselves swept up in the rescue effort. Former Dallas Times Herald executive editor Felix McKnight, then a young AP reporter, recalled, quote, "We identified ourselves and were immediately told that helpers were needed far more than reporters," unquote. Walter Cronkite also found himself in New London on one of his first assignments for UPI. Although Cronkite went on to cover World War II and the Nuremberg trials, he was quoted as saying decades later, "I did nothing in my studies, nor in my life, to prepare me for a story of the magnitude of that New London tragedy, nor has any story since that awful day equaled it. Of the more than 600 people in the school, only about 130 escaped without serious injury. Estimates of the number of dead vary from 296 to 319, but that number could be much higher, as many of the residents of New London at the time were transient oil field workers, and there is no way to determine how many volunteers collected the bodies of their children in the days following the disaster and returned them to their respective homes for burial. The bodies of most victims were either burned beyond recognition or severely fragmented. Many were identified by clothing or personal items. A student survivor recounted being in a makeshift morgue, saying, "I saw fathers fight over dead children like dogs over a bone, yelling, 'That's mine, no, mine.' I saw children who looked like roadkill. You couldn't tell if it was a boy, a girl, or what." The majority of the victims of the explosion are buried at Pleasant Hill Cemetery, near New London, with an entire section being designated for the victims. Though this disaster rocked America and crippled the communities of New London, Texas, and the surrounding areas, some good did eventually come from it. It was because of this incident that the Texas government demanded that thiols be added to natural gas immediately. The strong odor of thiols makes gas leaks quickly detectable. This practice quickly spread worldwide. The Texas legislature also met in an emergency session and enacted the Engineering Registration Act, now rewritten as the Texas Engineering Practice Act. Public pressure was on the government to regulate the practice of engineering due to the faulty installation of the natural gas connection, which caused the leak. The New London school explosion remains not just America's worst school disaster, but one of the 3 deadliest incidents to ever happen in a school building anywhere outside wartime. Only the 2004 Beslan school siege in Russia, with a death toll of 334, and the 1995 Dabwali school fire in India, with a death toll of 442, wound up being deadlier. For those who survived the explosion, the memories of that day were as clear as they were when it happened. Though we cannot change history, we can learn from it. Buildings and vehicles everywhere are safer now because of this tragedy. If you want to honor the victims of the explosion, perhaps the best way is to hug your own children tightly and remember that we are not promised tomorrow. Thank you for watching this video. I know it was a heavier subject today, and though this is a channel for creepy videos and chilling content, I hope I was respectful to the victims with my storytelling tonight. If you have any thoughts on this incident, please leave them in the comments below, and give this video a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. Stay safe out there, everyone, and come back soon, Cryptids.